Right, two more announcements. First of all, there is a call for volunteers. We all want to get more native plants in the ground, right? We only do that through all the good work that we do here. So there's a sign-up sheet on the back table there. If you have 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 months worth of time to donate, we can use your talents. So please consider signing up. And don't worry, we're not going to overtake. We're going to only appreciate whatever you have to offer. And we need all different types of talents. So whether you are really good with computer skills or you're really good with shovels, both are just as necessary. And one last thing, our next meeting is not a program, it's our annual meeting and seed exchange. So that's definitely one of our favorite meetings of the year. And that will be at 6 p.m. here in this church. And like in past years, please bring an appetizer or dessert to share. We'll go through a recap of the year, a preview of next year. We'll have fun. There will be fabulous prizes to be had, so you don't want to miss that. And then the seed exchange, that's important too, November 18th at 6 p.m. The seed exchange, if you haven't gone to a seed exchange before, you can bring seeds. So if your plants are being very productive, please package up all the seeds that you are willing to give away. Bring them in a jar, in an envelope, in a baggie, whatever method works for you and the quantity of seeds that you have. Label them with the common name and scientific name, and bring them, be willing to share those seeds with other people. And then bring your wish list of the seeds and the plants that you want to have growing in your yard. And we'll provide envelopes where you can put the seeds into that and take those back home with you, whether it's for winter sowing or for direct seeding, whatever works for you. It's a really great time. Last year, we tried something new where if you had gently used tools, books, equipment, you could bring that. And we had a table set up for gardening supply giveaways. We'll do that again this year. So if you have some things that you're no longer using that would benefit from a new home, you can bring that as well. We only ask that if they don't get adopted, that you take them back home with you. So we don't want to have a table full of shovels at the end of the night. But that should work. Again, November 18th at 6 p.m. is that meeting, so make sure that's on your calendar. The field trip that Doug talked about is October 26th, and Tom is raising his hand. Oh, that's true. Yes, we will have an election for chapter officers at that meeting as well. So it is election season. Hopefully this one is a little less polarizing. Let's just say that. All right. And with that, I would like to ask Kathy to come up and introduce our speaker for the night.
Okay, I'm happy to welcome Christopher Benda tonight, once again to present a program for our chapter. We've come to know him through a variety of his programs, and we always know that we'll come away with more knowledge and excitement about native plants. In short, I think we consider Chris a friend with a wealth of knowledge to share. Chris wears many hats. He's a botanist and past president of the Illinois Native Plant Society. Currently, he's a researcher at Southern Illinois University, and he's coordinator of the Plants of Concern Southern Illinois program, and that's what he's going to tell us about tonight. He teaches the flora of Southern Illinois, plus he conducts botanical fieldwork around the world, and I think he said he's been to Hawaii already 3 times this year. Is that right? He teaches classes at the Morton Arboretum. He leads nature tours for Camp Andasonk, which is down in the Shawnee. He also has research appointments at the University of Illinois and Argonne National Laboratory. Plus, he's an accomplished photographer, author of several publications, and you might even know him as the Illinois Botanizer on Facebook. You should look it up if you aren't. So we're happy to have you here today, Chris. He's going to tell us about some rare plants that aren't found in the rest of the state. The Plants of Concern program is based out of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and it seeks volunteers to help monitor rare plants. So, Chris, we're looking forward to your program. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for the invitation and the introduction to talk to you all about my day job, which is the coordinator of the Plants of Concern program in Southern Illinois. My name is Chris Benda, and like Kathy just said, I have a variety of different things that I do. Mainly, right now I'm working actually directly for the Chicago Botanic Garden, but the first 3 years, this is the 4th year of this position. The first 3 were full-time with SIU, past president of the Native Plant Society, and teach the flora class down south too. Find me online as Illinois Botanizer. I mainly post to Facebook, but Facebook and Instagram are linked now. You can post to one or the other and automatically cross-post, so I try to share to both those places. You know, I'm out all the time seeing neat things. It's a lot of work, but a lot of people seem to really enjoy it. So I try to keep up on the social media posting. But I also have a website, illinoisbotanizer.com, which is a repository for 20 years of plant photography that I've done in Illinois. It's very much a work in progress, but there's a lot of plant entries there right now. There's an example of that. And then I give a lot of programs. So I do have my speaking schedule on my website, but if you wanted to get an email reminder of upcoming programs, you can sign up on the website as well. Because I do a good number of virtual programs now. I actually have 2 already planned for next year. So those are opportunities that you could attend from your home. And then I've added a land acknowledgement to all my programs. It basically just brings awareness to the fact that we're on land that was cared for and inhabited by different cultures than it is now. And I think that it's a worthwhile exercise to take a moment and think about that. So Illinois is the prairie state, kind of a misnomer now because we have such little prairie remaining. But at one time, 22 million acres tall grass prairie in the state. If you look at the Illinois Natural Areas inventory, which has been underway since 1976, it's an inventory of all the high quality natural communities that remain in the state. And if you add them all up in aggregate, 0.07% of the state of Illinois is considered to be in a pristine or nearly pristine condition. So we have really fragmented and isolated our high quality natural areas in the state. And these are the areas that obviously harbor a lot of the rare plant vegetation. So those are INAI sites, Illinois Natural Areas Inventory. So some things about why I have this program. Why are we out looking for plants, monitoring them? So this is from a publication suggesting 1/3 of all plants are at risk for extinction. So we need to keep an eye on things. Obviously, there's a number of threats to our native vegetation. We'll go through them individually. Loss of habitat is a big one. Plants need places to live. And this is a picture I took flying in and out of O'Hare on one of my trips to Hawaii. And there's not a lot of places for plants to live here unless maybe you're a tree or a weed that likes to grow in a sidewalk crack or something. So loss of habitat, we've really changed the landscape of Illinois. We can also think about fragmentation. So this is Jackson County, where I live. I live just south of Carbondale and McCanda. And we can see some areas that are some thick green, forested that seem somewhat large. The Shawnee National Forest is there. If we go to Champaign County, of course, we can see all the little squares of all the sections that have been basically converted to agriculture for the most part. We've really changed the landscape there. And then, of course, Cook County, where we have urbanization. So a lot of the landscape has really been significantly altered. And then part of the things that threaten native plants also are just natural ecological processes in some way that, or actually I should say lack of the natural processes that are maintaining the forest. And here's a picture that I took just earlier this year. This is looking one direction into the woods of the Shawnee National Forest. And if I turn around and go the other way, that's the picture there. So actually, I should clarify, this is the privately owned portion. So they were not doing any management or work. And I'm on the dividing line, and then looking into the Shawnee National Forest, you can see where they have done management. It's much more open environment. Newsflash, plants need light to grow. So we need to get light to the forest floor in a lot of these places. Historically, our forests were much more open, and not only were they burning regularly, but the wind will move through these systems and dry them out. The oak hickory upland forest system is a dry environment. And so we're seeing what we call mesification. The forests are becoming more moist than they would have been historically. And there are several reasons for this. One is the tree canopy grows in so thick that the tree leaves are holding in that moisture. And then, of course, the wind can't move through it either. And so we're seeing plants that like a more mesic environment moving into areas that would have been drier. So if you think of the soil moisture, right? I mentioned the natural communities earlier. Most of the natural communities are described based on the soil moisture. So when you say upland forest, there are types of upland forest. The typical oak hickory upland forest is a dry mesic upland forest. We have a dry upland forest. We have a mesic upland forest. So think of mesic as moist. It's in between wet and dry. And that's what's happening. Our dry forests are becoming moister, and that's going to favor what we call mesophytes, plants that like those conditions, like beech and pawpaw and ironwood and sugar maple and things like that. So, and oak hickory, needs a lot of light for those trees to grow. As the conditions change, that's not happening. So I didn't mean to tangent into a whole different topic there, but I got excited. And another threat to native plants here are invasives. A lot of the people that I work with that are, towards the end of their careers in 30 years or plus, said there were hardly any invasives when they started their careers. And now that's what people are doing. A majority of their job is dealing with them themselves or hiring contractors to do that work. And bush honeysuckle, drive through Illinois in April, and you can't find a single woodlot that isn't totally infested, it seems, with bush honeysuckle. Which honestly, as far as dealing with invasives go, bush honeysuckle is one of the easiest ones to do. They're single stemmed usually. You can cut them easily. You can burn them the day that you cut them because they're so dry. It's just, I would do that all day. But like rose, I don't like, and privet, and any of the vines that go up trees. So those are threats. Here's stiltgrass, which we have huge problem in Southern Illinois. We've gotten to the point where we're not even dealing with this anymore. You just hope it'll run its course because you can't treat it very well. And as you can see in the picture, it's completely displaced the native vegetation. There's nothing growing there except that stiltgrass. We have climate change concerns. Basically, the Illinois climate is warming. So an interesting dynamic to that is in Southern Illinois, we're actually seeing plant species move north. And so rare plants that were restricted to the border of Southern Illinois now are moving north. And that's a good thing because they're becoming more common. But then in Northern Illinois, the opposite is they're also migrating north as the climate warms and not persisting. We have a lot of rare plants in Northern Illinois that are boreal in nature, and they need these coves and these moist, wet places, and the climate's changing, it's affecting them. So plants of concern is this program to it's pretty simple in design. One person can do one person's amount of work, and funding is always an issue. So can we enlist the help of volunteers to help do some of this rare plant monitoring? It started in Chicagoland over 20 years ago. They have a lot of volunteers in that region. In 2021, I was hired, so this is my 4th year. And then just this year, we expanded to Northwest Illinois as well. We'll skip over there. So one of the interesting things was they got a large anonymous donation. That's basically spearheaded for a lot of different things, including my initial funding position. So when I was hired, I was guaranteed 2 years, and we got 3 out of it. And that was the end of last year. And then now there was a different pot of money to move forward with. But I kind of go somewhat year to year. But with that initial money, the things we were able to do, hire a coordinator for Southern Illinois. And then they made a video about the program, a mobile app, online training, and website update. So if we look at them individually, if you go to plantsofconcern.org, anybody can sign up to be a monitor there. There's a training tab. And then they have this video that describes the program. Really well done video. The mobile app is the thing that sets this apart from any other rare plant program in the entire nation. And it's because we've put the Plants of Concern app on your phone. and you can do the monitoring on your phone in the field. Now, if you don't have an internet connection, you can't submit it, but as long as you refresh the app, with the connection, you can have your assignments when you get to the field and go through the whole thing and then you can submit it. But most places in Illinois, we have cellular connection and we can use it. The data entry used to do it on paper. There's prone for errors. They get piled up. You're nagging people. Please enter your data. The app is amazing. And you can take photos and put it right in with the report. Really useful. I mentioned the training was online, and then they revamped the entire website. You can search it for the plants that we monitor. So this is an old map. We've expanded to Northwest Illinois. I think there's maybe 4 counties in there. That coordinator lives in Rock Island. So maybe you can invite him sometime to talk about plants in that region. He's been making a lot of cool finds as well. So basically the idea is we're training people to visit a site annually and monitor a rare plant population. So we collect various data. Obviously, we need to have the location. And that's another thing that's nice with the app is you can say, like, essentially we try to map, you can only put in 4 coordinates. So you're trying to getting the corners, but with your phone, you can say, I'm here now, and it automatically enters it and go to another corner. You don't have to write down numbers and then enter them in incorrectly, all that. So that's a really nice feature. And then, of course, how many are there? I mean, this is like the 2 most important things. Where were you? What did you see? And at least an approximation of how many. So we're trying to count as much as possible. There's an option to count clumps, stems, or rosettes. It depends on the species you're monitoring. Sometimes you have vines and they're in a big mat, and it's really hard to really count them individually. So, do the best you can, essentially there. But on other things, they're blooming, like blue hearts. They reliably bloom every year. You flag them, each one, and it's really easy to count and get a precise count. And then you can enter the associates. So that's also really useful data that's often not collected when people are in the field, is what are the plants that are growing with the rare plant, as well as invasive plants that may be nearby, and other impacts that happen. We often have like a hydrological impact, or like trampling is another one too. And then types of management. So there's if any trees have been cut, like a thinning project, intentionally removing woodies versus herbaceous plants, and then application of prescribed fire. And most of the places have not seen a lot of management, but we're getting better there. So in Southern Illinois, where I live, basically all the colored areas on this map are public land. The Shawnee National Forest is brown, the blue are the wildlife refuges, and the state land is in green. And the red areas are natural areas. So there's a lot of places for plants to live. And to be honest with you, a lot of this data was collected in the last 50 years, but mostly 40 to 30 years ago. A lot of it has not been updated really well, which is why it was really a need to have this work being done in this region. So I've found, well, I have some data later, but I'll tell you now, my failure to find rate is 6% right now. So most of the time we're finding what we're looking for, which is good that these plants are still persisting there. And then if we don't find what we're looking for, we usually find 1 or 2 other things we weren't. So we're really, really getting a lot of data. So what are we out there monitoring? There's 3 categories for plants. Now, the really nice thing about this job, being the first one in this new position, is that they were like, run along and develop a program. And they let me do it. And I got to choose what counties were in Southern Illinois region. And I determined any county that has unglaciated terrain that's south of I-64. So it's the southern 11 most, and then Randolph, Monroe, and St. Clair, up towards St. Louis. So 14 counties. I got to develop the list. What species are we going to track? So 2 of them are no-brainers. This one is anything that is federally threatened or endangered automatically, is monitored. Well, in Southern Illinois, the only federally threatened species or federally listed plant is the Mead's milkweed, which is very, very rare. In Illinois, we actually have only one federally endangered plant, and that is the leafy prairie clover, which grows in Will County. So there's several federally threatened, but in Southern Illinois, just that one. So that's on the list. what are the state listed plants threatened and endangered? There's 300 and some species on that list. So any of those that are in those 14 counties would be added. And then this is where I got to use my expertise, is what is regionally rare. So like what the example I have here, Dirca palustris, is leatherwood, and it's throughout the state, but it is not very common. And so it's a regionally rare species. And I got to go through, and I'm adding stuff all the time as I learn about things that I haven't seen before. How rare is this? Let's track it. So I really like that I had the leeway to develop the list. I have 245 species that we're tracking currently. So this one here talking about, so another thing was, I learned that in Chicagoland, for the most part, the monitoring they're doing is being requested by the landowner. So why go to these places every year? What are we trying to discover? Well, a lot of times, especially in Chicagoland, there's a lot more human influence. And so you need to keep an eye on things. But usually the land manager is saying, I want these species monitored at these preserves. So in Southern Illinois, I didn't get any feedback on that. So I also, again, had to figure out, well, what deserves to be monitored? Because it was challenging. A lot of the really easy assignments were along the road with less than 50 plants that are, it's not, a harsh environment. Those aren't really the high priority ones. And the high priority ones are often challenging assignments. So here's the criteria I used. Anything that was really rare, fewer than 5 known occurrences, we should keep a track of that every year. Anything that is an annual, because annuals are all going to die and come back from seed every year. Those could have fluctuations. Some species that have natural population fluctuations, like a lot of the orchids, particularly the, and I'll have the picture of this later, the crested coral root orchid. So there's a number of different criteria to say, what can we really learn by visiting this every year? Some of these populations, they're stable, and we can collect data just to collect data, but those aren't really the high priority ones always. So here's a short list of the ones that I developed for that. So some of the interesting natural communities we have down south are a little different than other parts of the state. We have limestone glades. So limestone glade has a lot of similarity to a hill prairie, but it has, the substrate is the difference, but a lot of the same plants occur there. So it's nice because extreme southern Illinois is too south of the tall grass prairie. And so it's a neat to go to these glades and see prairie plants. When I moved to Illinois, I went to Urbana-Champaign and I lived in Lake County. And so I learned my prairie plants here. And so it feels like going home and get to these communities and see these plants I learned so long ago. We also have a lot of cliffs, sandstone cliffs. And there's limestone too, but primarily these sandstone canyons have unique vegetation on them. And then acid gravel seeps down in the extreme southernmost part of Pope County, like we're almost to the Ohio River. We have these forested wetlands with acidic pH, unique plants that occur there. And then the swamps. This is a picture of Grantsburg Swamp, one of my favorites there, Cypress Swamp. So here's some of those results in totality. I don't have everything from this year entered in, and I'm still actually doing field work. But for the most part, what we've had so far this year, I mentioned 245 species on the list. So I've gotten to 135 of them so far. We have monitored in every single county. St. Clair County is tough. There's not a lot left in St. Clair County. I did the botanical inventory of Scott Air Force Base 2 years ago, and we found an endangered plant there. So that got in there. So an EO is an element of occurrence. I like to think of an EO as a site. I went to Merwin Nature Preserve. There was this rare plant over there and another one over there. I've had 2 separate subpopulations at this one site. So 695 EOs with 901 subpopulations within those sites. But that's all them total that we've done, but we visited some more than once. So the monitoring reports here is a real thing. We've gone to a place, we've monitored a species, we filled in a report, submitted it, that's one. So we've done almost 1,200 of those in 4 years. I have to admit, the very first year, I got to hand pick a former student of mine that all he wanted to do was look for plants. And if we finished it early at like 3 and I dropped him off, he'd get in his car and he'd go off somewhere else and go look for plants. So I'm like, well, And then if you found something cool, then I'm going to want to go the next day. So I'm like, well, might as well just go with me every day, all day. And that we had 400 reports the first year because we just went crazy with it. So that really worked out well. Unfortunately, now with the new structuring, I don't have any assistance. I have to rely on volunteers, which they're amazing volunteers. In fact, there's 113 of them that have signed up for the program so far. Some other interesting statistics. So it's hard to get access to private land. Anytime somebody offers an invitation to go look, I try to do that because you can try contacting landowners. It's tough. There was a time when you could just go. I don't trespass anymore. And so it's tricky to get on private land, but 20% of our reports have been there. So most of them are on public land, which we have, again, I mentioned the state-owned property, and we have the National Forest, and then the wildlife refuges. So of these, 30% are state land, 45% on the Shawnee National Forest. And if I add up all the volunteer hours you've submitted for the whole project, we're almost 5,000 hours submitted. So a lot of work has gone into this. And this is sort of a map of all the red dots are essentially rare plant points that I have on my phone. I use an app called Topo Maps too, that I do a lot of tracking with and mapping on. And this is sort of an idea of where are the rare plants distributed throughout the area. And now I want to just go through, profile a few interesting rare plants and what we've learned about them. But I'll first say that it has really been, I feel like the 15 years of training and experience and life jobs that I had led me perfectly to this job. And I was just so ready to go for it. And that's why sometimes it could be intimidating if you're not getting a lot of direction. And I was like, yes, go away. Let me take care of it. I'm on it. And we hit the ground running. So often it just had unbelievable days and unbelievable finds. And I'm going to share some of them with you. But I would go home and my wife would say, how was your day today? And I would go, it was epic. And she would joke with me and say, yesterday was epic. And last week was epic. And every day can be. It really, really is amazing. So this one, I wonder if you've ever heard of. It's called black spleenwort fern. We have a very common spleenwort fern in Illinois called the ebony spleenwort fern. This one has opposite leaves, essentially. And when I just started the program, the botanist at the Shawnee National Forest had insinuated that this plant was on the verge of extinction, that there hasn't been any records in the last 20 years, and some of the reports at some of the sites say it was been over-collected. So I thought, well, this is exciting. What was really nice is that it's really evident in February. So I was hired in January. I thought, here's one we can get started on. And there were 5 locations for it. We went to all 5 and we found it at 4 of them. And there was a lot of it at one of the sites. So I learned the reason we didn't know about this because nobody was looking. Nobody had been out to look. And it grows in abundance at LaRue Pine Hills, which are limestone cliffs and talus, basically. And it's really steep and challenging. And you go in February because that's when the cottonmouths are hibernating. And because you're basically going through cottonmouth habitat looking, which, I'll go through cottonmouth habitat with they're there anyway. But, they hide in those places. And you can see me scaling the cliffs there looking for them. So 4 EOs, 10 subpops, and 3 counties. We basically started with that one and we said, okay, everywhere that this has been known, or at least in each county this has been known from, we verified it's in each of those counties. Like I said, we didn't find one population. And I mentioned the leatherwood earlier. So leatherwood is really neat. The twigs are extremely pliable. I joke and say you could tie your shoes with a twig of leatherwood. You could take it and bend it around in 3 circles and let go, and it'll just spring back to normal. It's really interesting. And it's got beautiful flowers early March. So again, we're chomping at the bit, ready to go. This is like mid-March. We went out and they're really conspicuous when they bloom. There was so much more out of there in the area than I realized. 7 EOs, 11 subpops, and 4 that are new. And it's hard to tell when a plant occurrence is new if it's not on the state threatened or endangered list, because no one has submitted information on it because it's not being tracked. So it's a little bit trickier there to determine that. But for this particular species, I had good data that had been collected at one time about where it was, and we found several more. One is a county record. So the county, lines are meaningless to a plant, of course, but that is how we document vegetation, was what counties does it occur in. We were just barely over the line in Johnson County from Pope when we got that county record, but that counts. It was a new county. The early saxifrage I went for next, I'd never seen this plant in bloom before. It grows only in Hardin County. Hardin County is the southeasternmost county in Illinois along the Ohio River. And along the Ohio River are these big sandstone bluffs and cliffs. And so not only is it in one county in Illinois, it's in one portion of one county in Illinois. And I went in there and it was all over the place. I had to stop counting. It was just like, there's another 1,000, there's another 1,000. And so I estimated over 50,000 stems of this. It was just everywhere. And I thought, so this really got me thinking, what does it mean to be rare? If there's so much of it, but yet it's only in this tiny little part of Illinois. You go across the river to Kentucky and it's common there. We're just right on the edge of range. And that's really, Illinois doesn't have a lot of plants. Everything in Illinois that's rare is common somewhere else for the most part. Illinois has a very young landscape, so we don't have a lot of endemics, meaning a plant that only is known to occur within the state of Illinois. We do have some that are rare in Illinois and rare elsewhere, but most of the time they're rare in Illinois because we're in the center of the continent. Northern stuff barely makes it, south enough to be in northern Illinois and vice versa from all directions. And that's the case with this one. And it's really pretty, early blooming wildflower. Oh, and there's another point I wanted to make. So here's a map. It's a little hard to tell. Well, you can see here, there's 4 polygons that are outlined in blue. That was where the distribution was in the database that I was given. So that's where I knew where to go. All the green dots are where I found it. So sometimes it's using the data available, but fine tuning it and then finding areas outside of those. So much more distributed in this region than it had previously suggested. Another one that's really rare is this one here. There were 2 known places, and we've only been to 1 so far, and we found 2 new spots. One of the things is there is a forester now in the southern region who looks down. We have a forester who looks down, and she's finding herbaceous plants. And rare ones because she knows her vegetation. And so the more eyes you have out there, and then she's feeding me this information. So she said, oh, I found this chickweed and this really, we're having a lot of forest management plans written in Illinois because it's a big incentive for the landowner financially. And so the foresters have to visit these properties and sign off on them. So she's going to all this private land that we didn't have access to and finding cool plants because she's looking down. And this was one of them. Beautiful, beautiful wildflower right there. And then this is one is really exciting too. Now, if you get excited about sedges, you're a really special person and probably going to be one of my close friends. But this is Carex nigromarginata. It's a black-edged sedge. There were 3 locations in the database for this one, and I went to all of them, and I have a publication in the Illinois Native Plant Society Journal from like 2013. Went to all 3 and verified all 3 were there. We have 20 sites now for this. So this sedges bloom, well, at different times, but the woodland sedges often bloom early and then they fruit. And the fruit are the perigynia. That's what you need to identify them, to look at these structures. But once they're ripe, they fall off and they're gone, just like, grass seed. And it's hard to identify without that. This one blooms in March and it fruits in April. And by the first week of May, they're gone. And so you can't easily identify it without those fruit. A lot of people aren't out that early in the year, or, it's a specialty just in itself being Carex. Now, I got to the point where I can identify it vegetatively, but if I find it, I'll flag it and I'll make sure to come back the next year. Usually I want to get a collection anyway with fruit, but this plant is all over the place. We did this huge 3,000 acre survey for the Forest Service this year. We had like over 200 clumps, or actually not clump, 200 just different points throughout this area. It was clearly overlooked. So that's really interesting. One of my favorite sedges now. There you can kind of see the fruit there, and they have a little black margin to them. Wild azaleas. Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful. This is another one. It's not tracked, but John Schwegman and Max Hutchison and some of these early biologists who worked on the natural areas in Illinois, they put maps together of plants that they thought were rare. This was before we had a threatened and endangered list. So they were just doing this on their own, and they had indicated all the places they'd seen wild azalea, and there were just 7. And so I went to all those and documented that they were all still there. And some of the populations like this one, they're just so gorgeous and they're very fragrant. We joke and say that you can smell the wild azalea before you see them. And there are 3 species listed in Illinois, but I've only been able to find this one. And I'm going to have to look into that. I wonder, that could be an error. But 3 counties for wild azalea. Now, this is a plant that is rare in Illinois and rare throughout its range. The Synandra hispidula, called a Guyan dot beauty, or I just like calling it Synandra. It's like hydrangeas, hydrangea, geraniums, geraniums, phloxus, phlox. I wish we had more common names like that. But in any event, this one, there were just 6, and it seemed really rare, and we've documented all those, and then a county record of a new population of a state endangered plant. That's like really, really high on the list of like cool achievements to have doing this kind of thing. And I have 2 volunteers who are trail runners, and they'll run like 20 miles in a day. And they were in this really remote area on a run and came through this scene basically, and nobody knew about it. Really exciting. Because this only occurred, previously we only knew this had occurred in Jackson County, around Little Grand Canyon and Giant City in that area. So like I said, adding a new population itself would be huge, and in another county was a big deal. This is a species, so if any of you are familiar, John Schwegman, he was the first state botanist in Illinois. I talked to him quite a bit still. He lives down near Metropolis. He named this species as new to science during his career in Illinois, Oxalis illinoisensis. It looks superficially like our common yellow oxalis that may grow in your garden, or, it's kind of a weedy thing. It's a native. But these flowers are much larger and the leaves are much larger, and it usually grows in fairly high quality areas in large, dense patches. I've never seen the weedy oxalis grow like that, except maybe in a garden or in a disturbed area. And they have a little kind of a red center that helps distinguish them from the others as well. Funny thing is, I was in Kentucky giving a program last year, and they have this species there, and they actually have quite a bit of it there, and it's pretty rare in Illinois. And they said, this should be called Kentucky wood sorrel, because we have more than Illinois. I thought that was funny. So I was talking to John Schwegman, who named it, and I said, this is what they said in Kentucky. And he goes, well, if they knew what they had in Kentucky and named it themselves, they could have named it themselves. I did it, so I made it Illinois. Okay. And now this is another really exciting one. Getting information from the public can be really valuable, but vetting that information can sometimes be tricky. And I remember when I worked at the Illinois Natural History Survey, one of the ornithologists said, it's that person that calls in and says they've seen an ivory-billed woodpecker, and you're like, no way. What if that's the one, and you didn't go check. And so this was an interesting story that the naturalist at Giant City said, I just had a volunteer in here, and she said there's green trillium on her property. And I said, no way, I don't believe it. I said, we have lots of trilliums, and I was just skeptical. And I said, can you get a photo? She got a photo, and she texted to me, and I was like, well, that's green trillium. So I went out to her property. That was only the second population that I had heard of this plant. And now we have 8 sites, 10 subpopulations. We just found a lot more of it. In fact, another interesting story was where that woman had lived was on a little creek. Just near, if you've been down in Southern Illinois, it's near Blue Sky Winery. So the creek goes down and it goes under the road, and then it continues down. And the people that own Blue Sky Winery own land there. And a friend of mine said, I worked for them 20 years ago, and I swear I was driving through that creek on the way to the job site, and I saw green trillium right there on the side of the road. And I thought, really? So they were nice and let me out there. We found like 300 plants going around that nobody knew were there. So then I start looking at a map, and I find there's a tributary coming into that creek from other property that the university actually owned. So I didn't bother to contact anybody. I went out there and looked, and there were like 500 plants there. So I kind of expanded my search since then, and I didn't find any more in that spot. But that was really fun to feel like I used some kind of reasoning skills to figure out where these rare plants could be. And it is a kind of a stunning one. Well, all the trilliums are really. So just this species only occurs in Missouri and Illinois, nowhere else in the world. And Missouri has quite a bit of it. Otherwise, it'd be federally threatened too. And in Illinois, it's really restricted distribution. And there's another picture, the beautiful flowers. Now, Harvey's buttercup was added in 2020 and is threatened. And so I wanted to get a good estimate on that. There are 29 buttercups in Illinois. This is one that has, it's similar to the weedy small flowered buttercup, which is Ranunculus abortivus or Ranunculus macranthus, but it's got a little bit shorter flowers. But it grows in these sandstone ravines. There's actually a separate population in Effingham County, and then Macoupin, and then the rest are all in Southern Illinois. Anyway, we found them at all of them and found one new one. In fact, my friend's birthday party, he owns this canyon in Pomona, and I had my dog with, and my two dogs were being obnoxious. And I thought, I'm going to go up into the woods and let them run around. And then I got up and I'm like, oh, these cliffs are kind of cool. So I'm walking along there, and at the very end, I'm like, oh my gosh, here is Harvey's buttercup. We're like at least, 40 miles by the crow flies to the nearest spot. So I wasn't expecting that. And I come out of the woods with the specimen in my hand, and my friend that works for the Nature Conservancy said, I told you when he went up there, he was going to come back with something cool. And I was like, this is a really cool find. In fact, they're probably going to make their land a nature preserve now out of this. So really cool. Buffalo clover is another rare one that we monitor, and this grows statewide. It's a biennial. It has really wild population swings. I had sites where there were hundreds, go there the next year, and there's none. And they're not even first-year plants. But then you go a few years later, and then they're back, and you think, if it's a biennial, it's got to kind of be there somewhere. But it just, and actually they have long-term data at Medewan about this, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. So it's a good one to keep an eye on. They're often red or like this or pink, but sometimes they're white, but they'll have leaves on the stem. So one of the programs that I developed is called Rare Plants and Their Common Lookalikes. Because as I was sharing a lot of these photos, like the wood sorrel one earlier, people were saying, oh, I've seen that, I got that. Oh, this looks like your lawn white clover, but it has leaves on the stem as the flowers. The lawn clover, leaves are on their own stalk, flowers on their own stalk. So some of these plants can look similar to other more common ones. Now, we do have milkweeds in Illinois that are not Asclepias. They're vines in the Matelia genus. This is one. Again, I've never seen this plant before I started this job. And we had 4 known locations. Now we're up to 8 with 13 subhops. And they're doing really well. It really responds well to management. This is an exciting one. I just think they're really, really beautiful flowers. There's a similar species, and you cannot tell them apart, but they're not in flower. And they have a small flowering period. So you really need to get out. It's about mid-May, usually. And then orchids. So this is another one where populations fluctuate a lot, and this is a lot more common than it once was. In fact, it should probably be removed. We're up to 26 subpopulations now, and that's just the Southern Illinois region, and there's populations outside of that. It is a pretty orchid, though. In fact, the one in the picture, I'm barely bending down to be next to it. It was they can get really kind of tall with the spiraling flowers. And featherbells is another one. This is interesting because it's kind of like a lily, and it has persistent leaves every year, but they don't always bloom. And you think a plant that's mature enough to bloom one year should be mature enough to bloom the next year, but that's not the way that it works. So the populations are stable to some degree with the number of stems, but the number of blooms can be all of them to none of them from year to year. So that seemed like a good one, at least. You think, well, looking at individual numbers, it doesn't seem rare, but if they're not reproducing, if they're not blooming, then that could be an issue. So we're keeping an eye on those. And we've had 7 new populations in the last, those are all, none of them this year, so the last 3 years. For that, and blue hearts is an annual on hill prairies. And it's also pretty rare. We only have it in Monroe County in Southern Illinois, but it grows statewide as well. It's really kind of interesting. And John Schwegman figured this out in his research that they're annuals typically, but if they can parasitize a composite nearby, then they become perennial. And he was like digging up and tracing them to figure all this out. So interesting strategy that. Now, this is the orchid I mentioned earlier, crested coral root orchid, parasitic, mycoheterotroph, so cannot photosynthesize. We had a site that we had 112 2 years ago, and there were 2 this year. And nothing has changed. They seem to respond to fire. That site had gotten burned. Again, it really fluctuates. And this is an important one, I feel, to go to every year. But we're up to 25 subpopulations in 5 counties. And they bloom in the last week of July. And they grow on steep, full sun hill prairies. It is one of the most challenging assignments we have to do. It's like, well, who wants to walk up this hill prairie in 100-degree weather? But I have a few volunteers who help me every year with that. And another orchid too, much more common than we thought. This is the tubercled orchid, Botanthera flava, variety flava. In fact, one population had 6,000 stems, we counted, estimated. And that wasn't even a known population before that. So we're really, really finding a lot of new sites for this. In fact, I didn't mention this earlier. The first 2 years of the program, a third of the reports we submitted for just species that were listed as threatened and endangered were new to the database. We're finding a ton of new locations. And like I said, sometimes we go out for one thing, we find it, or maybe not. We find 3 or 4 other things we didn't even know were there. Really amazing. And this orchid just covers this whole swamp down in Johnson County. Let's skip over that one. Then this one looks sort of like Michigan lily, but it's like a Michigan lily on steroids. They're 8 feet tall, huge whorled leaves, giant flowers and stamens and everything. I know one place for this. And it was formerly listed and removed. And I guess I don't know the whole story there because it seems to be truly rare. And there's some pictures of that one. The Spain flower is another one here. They call it flower of an hour because it only flowers for a single hour. And in Southern Illinois, that's about 5:30. It took me a long time before I saw them bloom because I'm not usually out that late necessarily. And I was one time, and they just start opening, and I thought, wow, because if you read the books, they make different mention of when the blooms are. But it's a little succulent on these sandstone glades. 4 new populations for that one. And then probably, again, the sedges, they're the best. And this isn't even Carrick sedge. This is the genus Scleria. They call them the nut rushes. This one here, this little tubercle and these little teeth here kind of divided on there, that's the key to identification for this. There was one place in all of Illinois for this species since the 90s until a couple years ago, and now we have 3. And that's really exciting to add knowledge to this little sort of obscure sedge. I'm going to move on here. There's a couple more here. The American snowbell bush, I did a comprehensive survey for because some of these if we determine they're much more common than we thought, they can be removed. They're recovered, or at least more knowledge has been attained. So I had 47 subpopulations for this shrub. It grows in wetlands. It's actually just junked in like a Kankakee area, but mostly in extreme southern Illinois. Really beautiful flowers on this one. And I think it's something you can get, at least its cousin you can get in the nursery trade. Really fragrant, pretty flowers. And it was a ton of work to go to all, 47 subpopulations. I had to take it, just stretch it over 2 years. And we've determined it's too common to be listed. So that was really good determination as well. And at the same time, I actually did this one. This one was not seen in any site in 20 years. And I hadn't seen it ever. And there was only 5 ones in the database. This is also really important information, is that plants can be misidentified. And this one is very similar to another species. And 3 of the 5 locations were erroneous. The wrong species there. So we were down to 2. And at both of them, the first year of the survey, I didn't find any plants. And I'm like, the species is gone, I guess. Well, just because I'm out and about all these places, we found 6 new subpopulations elsewhere. And then I returned, they're annuals. So I returned the following year and found them at the sites that I didn't find them at the year before. So we clarified that not only is there some, but 3 were incorrect. And then we've added a bunch more new ones. And it is really, in fact, I made this video. Oh, cool. Look at this. called mud plantain. Right down here. And then that's my excitement horn that I play when I...
Mud plantain, Heteranthera reniformis. And this is the first documented population of this year for Alexander County. This is a Illinois endangered species.
So that's a day in the life. All right, I just have a couple more slides here. I also want to mention, I got this list from the Shawnee National Forest botanist of extirpated species that may be extirpated on the forest, meaning haven't been seen in so long, perhaps they don't grow here anymore. And we found two, it was a list of like 8 of them, and we found 2 of them at the same site, and it's Grantsburg Swamp. And Grantsburg Swamp is one of my favorite places. I developed a program last year that's called the Flora of Grantsburg Swamp. But it is a place where you are walking in, thigh-deep water to ankle-deep water with cypress trees and cottonmouths. Lots of cottonmouths. And I'm not deterred by snakes. I like snakes. But when you're and you leave the snakes alone, right? They'll leave you alone. Just give them room, they're going to leave. But when you're standing in the water and you see a large cottonmouth on a log and it disappears into the same water you're standing in, it takes a very special person to be able to be comfortable in that situation and do this monitoring. And I thought, well, maybe that's why these plants hadn't been seen in so long. Nobody wants to go out in there. So we have the pink turtle head on the left, and then hydrolia is the little blue flower there on the right. Another cool thing that I did with this is I had a photo display. I try to take herbarium specimens when possible, because then you can document with a physical specimen that anybody in the future can look at and verify that you saw what you said you saw. We can kind of do this with photos to some degree, and iNaturalist is good for that, but it's also good sometimes, especially if it's a new location, if there's enough plants there to just take one. And even if there aren't a lot there, if they're perennials and you clip them off without pulling the roots, they should come back. And we really do need just one specimen. And so I partnered a photograph of a rare species in the wild with a specimen that I'd collected and had this display. And what I wanted to mention is some volunteers want to help and they don't have maybe the physical ability to get out and do the monitoring. They came and said, are there other things they can do? And I'm collecting all these plants. It took me an hour to do 5 gluings, of plants. And I had like 100. I thought, there's no way I'm gonna get this done. So now volunteers do all the mounting of the plants. In fact, there's one woman volunteering who's 90 years old. Every plant specimen has a little folded up envelope that has to be glued on it. And that's her job, that she folds the envelopes and just loves it. They bring them to the nursing home and everything. And I thought, this is capturing a whole new group of people that otherwise wouldn't be involved with their herbarium vouchers. So, all right, I'm going to finish with just the 3 new things to Illinois. This was overlooked and identified as a different species of uvularia. This is at Heron Pond. Heron Pond has been a nature preserve for 50 years. It's been thoroughly documented. Botanists have walked down this trail past this plant for a long time, and no one stopped to look at it closely. Somebody posted it on iNaturalist, identified it as a different species. Somebody looked at it and said, that's not what that is. And it's ended up being Uvularia floridana. It's only known in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, I think. It's not even in any state adjacent to Illinois. And here it is at Heron Pond. And it's not because it just got there. It's been there, and nobody looked at it closely. So that was huge. I think they added that as a new endangered species. And then the forester I mentioned earlier was working on a cutting project in private land and found this orchid. It's called the Southern Twayblade, Neotia bifolia, new to the state, a new orchid, a native species. It's more in the southeast. So that was a really cool find. We just have the one site for it so far. And then I actually have a few state records. A state record is, a pretty big deal too, especially if it's something native. And this is a newly documented chokeberry, the Aronia arbutifolia. It's found at Giant City State Park. So we're still out there finding new. Illinois is about one of the most thoroughly botanized places. We've had a lot of renowned botanists travel through and work and study in Illinois, and there's still a lot of things to find, which obviously makes it very inspiring. I mentioned in the beginning that there was only one federally threatened species in southern Illinois. Yeah, well, that was until I found another one. That was the Boltonia decurrens. It's only known really from the Illinois River Valley mostly, and it's a flood disturbance species, and we found it down in Alexander County, not too far from the Mississippi River. So that was a really big deal to add that one. So I just have a few takeaways here. Like I mentioned, many assignments are challenging. Often the places we really need to go are you park on the side of the road and you navigate with a map. There's no trail. You're walking through the woods. It's hot and there's ticks and all sorts of various things. And so that's a challenge to get volunteers involved in. Some huge populations, like I said earlier, less than 50 is great. And if you have pin flags, you can just turn your brain off and you don't have to keep track. It depends on the situation, but it's easiest usually to put a pin flag next to each individual, and then you just go and collect them all back up and count them. Or what we usually do is reproductive in your right hand and the vegetative in your left. So you have two piles and you count the numbers. Because obviously you can kind of start counting and then you're, oh, did I count that one? Is that a new one? But what stinks about it is if the site is large and it's hilly, you kind of make your way putting pin flags, and then you got to go all the way back through and pick them all back up. So we try to use them where possible. And then, graminoids, which are the sedges and grasses, they're really hard to identify. And if they're not in their peak season, it can be challenging. Okay, so that is where I'm going to end the discussion. And we're out of time anyway, so I would be happy to answer a few questions if anyone has one. So this is a common question I'm asked about, propagating native plants or trying to bolster plant populations. We haven't done that yet, and in Chicago they have with some. The dune willow. I don't know if you're aware, but Lake Michigan is the waters are really high on Lake Michigan, and it's eroding the beaches away, and they have these cliffs that are just eroding into the water, and so they've put the dune willow back in some that they grew in the greenhouse. But in southern Illinois, I'm not sure how many really need that help yet, and it's a lot of work to collect and permitting, and then someone has to grow them. And to be honest with you, I have no green thumb. I love plants. I don't have any landscaping. I don't have any garden, or even my house plants are my wife's responsibility. So I think on some, like the green trillium, people have transplanted. I know people who have them on their own land and they've moved them to their house and they expand. And I feel like we could put this back somewhere. So it's something that we should do, and we haven't gotten to that point. The situation for native plants, is it good in Illinois? In southern Illinois, yes. And again, we have a lot of public land and places for plants to occur. The rest of Illinois, not so much. And one of the reasons we don't have a program in central Illinois is it's a large region where the places that plants can occur are very scattered, and there aren't that many. In fact, I was trying to see if my colleagues could meet me somewhere in this area for this tomorrow, and we could go do some monitoring together, and we couldn't really come up with anything that this time of year that was a good fit. So in southern Illinois, things seem to be more stable. Mary Jo.
Have you run across private landowners that have not given you access to their property because they don't want you to find a threatened or endangered plant, or are in most part they're really cool?
I only approach landowners that I know are receptive. So a lot of the times there's a connection with usually it's DNR personnel who have a connection, and they'll get access for me. So I haven't really gone out specifically to ask someone like a cold call or that nobody had a connection to, can I come on your property? But usually in Illinois, I've had good experiences. I mean, it helps to tell people or kind of give them the idea that you have something on your property that no one else does. And isn't that cool? But to be honest with you, I'm very cautious of it because I wasn't even doing anything wrong in Missouri, and I had someone point an assault rifle at me and threaten me. And so I'm very careful about where I am and what I'm doing. And thankfully, I haven't run into that. There's an instance that comes to mind. It's a roadside plant that's extremely rare, and I keep an eye on it because it's along the road. And it's right on the edge of a farm field, and it's just too wet to farm. And so they'll mow it when it's dry, but it's an annual, so it can handle the mowing. And I'm thinking, on the one hand, should I engage this landowner and say, just make sure you don't plow here? But then I thought, well, maybe it's better off not being known, and it's persisted to this point. Which is better? Probably the former, but I think about that. Maybe it's good that no one knows it's there and that it's rare. And whatever they're doing is allowing it to persist. But it also just takes one sale to the new landowner, and they want to put a couple more strips of corn in or whatever. It's challenging. Back.
So when you find a previously undocumented species in a new county, how does that species get from you finding it to and I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, the BONAP data? Like how,
tell
us about that process.
That is an excellent question. So the Biota of North America project is BONAP acronym, and you can type in any plant genus and then BONAP, and it'll bring up all the maps that are in North America for that genus. And you can click on the one you're looking at and see the counties it's mapped in. It would be great to update that. I've emailed with the website author, and I haven't got there yet. But they're 2014 maps, so they're pretty good. But yes, those need to be updated. We need our own project. So the other question is, I have a bunch of county records and state records that I've mentioned. I have an herbarium specimen that can be verified. What do you do with that? And so it needs to be published somewhere. And I'm working on publishing in the Illinois Native Plant Society Journal, but then it lives there. And if nobody's aware of it there, then it won't be utilized. Like I have a relationship with Dr. Mullenbrock, who of course is our authority for plants in Illinois. He just turned 93 last month. He talks about a new edition, but he may not really be, we need to find a new way forward. And it's something that we've pitched to the IDNR, is that we need a way to document county distributions that is a living document that changes with new information. So we're not there. So the best thing to do is to tell people about it and get it published that you can reference. But yes, we need a better system. And it may be just a communication with BONAP to get their stuff updated. I'm not sure. But we kind of need to be doing our own. And it's something that I would love to do for Southern Illinois, the 14 counties that I've worked in. I want to do a new a conservation value list. I want to do a flora of Southern Illinois book, and I want to track all this stuff and, me and the rest of my life, basically. So excellent question. Okay.
I love your idea. Thank you. I loved your idea of the herbarium specimen with the flowers. Do you have plans or other ideas of ways that you can boost up the knowledge about herbaria specimens, especially with them not being very well funded, the closure of Duke's and things like that?
Right. Well, I haven't thought of anything other than doing that exhibit again, which this was at Giant City State Park, where they get a lot of visitors there. That's interesting. Yeah, should think on that, about getting the word out more. Because you're right, most people don't know what they are, their value. And luckily in Southern Illinois, the herbarium, it's ebbed and flowed, and right now it's in a really good spot. But yeah, a lot of universities are unloading their specimens to other places, including Duke, which is the second largest in the United States.
And wonderful that you're getting volunteers from everywhere to help. And then my other question is about, do you know about insect relationships between some of these rare plants? Because that could also go hand in hand with a lot of cool conservation.
That would be a very good idea too. Yes. I have minimal myself knowledge on that. I do try to photograph insects more, especially because of iNaturalist makes identification a lot easier. But that isn't something that I've really incorporated in any way in earnest. It's something that it's a great suggestion. But so far, I'm kind of overwhelmed with just, I feel like in 5 more years, I'm going to have every single rare plant location documented in Southern Illinois, and that'll be a good place to be at. But yes, that's a good suggestion. Is there's a lot more going on there than just a plant occurring. There's other interactions to be concerned about. Okay. Well, with increased funding, I think we could. And I actually have gone outside of the region for stuff that I really wanted to track, but I pretty much have not. So I think there's talk of expansion, but like I said, we're all kind of already going year to year on our own salaries. But yes, we would like to move out new areas.
When you come across the rare plant, how do you document its blooming time and the history of the plant and so forth, so that others can find it?
Well, so one of the things in the website for each plant is to list the bloom time, and that is a really hard thing to do. If you are in the Chicago region, the Flora of Chicago has a nice bloom time window listed there, so you can just take that information. But I found it to be challenging because especially some species don't bloom necessarily the same time every year. A lot of them, especially the summer ones, I mean, it's like clockwork, but the spring really can fluctuate. So the best thing that we have is a report that has a date on it and the status of the plant on that visit. But other than that, there's nothing else really tracked in that regard.
Thank you.
All right, great questions. Very inquisitive group. It's good.
Anybody else? Well, I think I was right. You've gotten us more excited and you've shared so much knowledge with us. Thank you for being here, Chris.
Thank you.